All right. Welcome, everybody. We are here to talk about nation-state power play, Bitcoin strategic reserves. I'm David Zell. I run a think tank in Washington that examines Bitcoin's societal impacts. It's called the Bitcoin Policy Institute. To my left, we've got Shinobi, we've got Tom, and we've got Pierre.
Excuse me, my name is Matthew Pines.
Yeah, we had a last-minute substitution, but happy to have Shinobi with us. So why don't you guys take a second and introduce yourselves?
So hi, I'm Shinobi, the technical editor at Bitcoin Magazine. I am pretty much the person to yell at if technical facts are incorrectly stated in Bitcoin Magazine publications. And other than that, I don't know. I have spent way too much time obsessing over how Bitcoin works, so I've wound up knowing a lot about it.
All right. Tom?
Yeah, I'm Tom van Lamoen. I'm the party leader of the Dutch Libertarian Party, so I'm a politician. Don't call me that because I don't like it, but here we are. And I've been an activist in the monetary system for like 15 years, very much against fractional reserve banking, central banking, and a proud Bitcoin maxi.
Hi, my name is Pierre Rochard. I'm the Vice President of Research at Riot Platforms. I also helped co-found the Satoshi Nakamoto Institute, and I'm also a libertarian, but I don't know if I'm a politician. I wouldn't use that title.
Neither would I. So look, guys, today this conversation is going to be a bit of a debate. I think Pierre over there is sort of in favor of nation-state strategic reserves of Bitcoin.
Strongly in favor.
Sorry?
Strongly in favor.
Strongly in favor. Let the record reflect that. The gentlemen here in the middle both have reservations, criticisms. I guess we'll sort of see that hash out. But the way today is going to work is Pierre is going to take 5 minutes and give you the case for nation-state reserves, why these are good. Tom and Shinobi are going to take 5 minutes each and respond, give their ideas. We're going to let Pierre wrap it up. And then we're going to have time at the end for these guys to kind of ask questions, go back and forth. And then maybe we'll take an audience vote at the end and see whether or not we're in favor of strategic reserves here. So, Pierre, you want to just kick it off and maybe sort of set the framing for what exactly a strategic reserve is?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, a strategic reserve would be the government holding some quantity of Bitcoin on their balance sheet as an asset. And the reason why I think that they should do this, there's, first of all, just the same reasons why any corporation or individual or family or a nonprofit would want to have a Bitcoin reserve. Because of Bitcoin's finite scarcity, right? There's only going to be 21 million. So we can start from there. And then, of course, the permissionless nature of transacting with it, self-custody. It comes down to the freedom of holding your own money, of controlling your own money and being empowered in that way. I think that when we talk about a nation state, then the only difference is that we're talking about a nation state. And so we have to think about, okay, well, in the context of a nation state, do those arguments still hold that we would want this entity to hold reserves of Bitcoin? And I think it does. First of all, from a philosophical perspective, what I really enjoyed hearing was Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, on national television saying Bitcoin is above governments. And I think that that's a really keen insight that he had, and one that I've heard from Bitcoiners a lot over the years. And it comes down to the fact that by being decentralized, Bitcoin is outside of the control of any single government, and that when we think about a nation state adopting a Bitcoin reserve, in my mind, they are bending the knee to the private sector, if we want to call it that, to the market, to human freedom, to say that, hey, we're going to adopt a monetary asset that's open source and that's outside of our control, and we're doing it in a way where the government becomes a pleb, right? It's a levelizing way of they become a peer on the network. So I think that I don't see a concern of governments controlling Bitcoin per se by adopting it. And then it's a matter of, okay, well, do we want the government to get the same benefits that individuals and corporations get from Bitcoin? And here, there might be irreconcilable differences between those who say, well, we want the government to collapse and to go away and to disappear, and so therefore we don't want to give them any tools that would benefit them. Then there's the opposite perspective of actually we want some form of government. Now, whether it's territorial monopoly, like a state, like a very, or if it's a more competitive polycentric law, something more libertarian along those lines. At the end of the day, we want some kind of governance structure in our society to engage in some collective action project. And we want them to do it in the best way possible. And if we have a very optimistic view of the government and of wanting to improve it, and we have hope, then it's obvious that we should want the government to have a Bitcoin reserve so that it will have the resources to serve the citizens.
All right. Tom, why don't we start with you and your perspective?
Sure. Well, Pierre said a lot of things, of course. Let's not make this into a libertarian discussion about how much government we want. This is a totally different subject. So, but in my opinion, I'm principled libertarian, and from these viewpoints, it's pretty easy. If your government can buy Bitcoin, you're paying too much taxes, in my opinion. It's the people who should own Bitcoin and not your government. So this is, of course, a very libertarian view. But even if you accept that your government is going to buy Bitcoin, then there's still a lot of criticism that goes with it. The first thing is for the balance sheet, as you said. When government holds Bitcoin on their balance sheet, it incentivizes them to print more money. Even in the way, because then their Bitcoin will become worth more. So debasing the currency is an implied incentive. But also their balance sheet will look more healthy. So they are able to loan more money and to go more deficit spending without having to go to Congress, if we take the United States for an example. And for me, it's very different. If we look at El Salvador, they've just said, we're not going to do any deficit spending. We're going to have we won't go over budget. And this is, in my opinion, a very good thing, of course, as an example. But I think United States is not really there yet. It's the country that's most addicted to money printing with 35 trillion in debt. So if United States would put it on their balance sheet, I think it would only incentivize them to do more deficit spending without having to go to Congress to raise the debt ceiling. So in my opinion, this is kind of not good for the people in the country. It's good for Bitcoin, it's good for the Bitcoiners, but me, for sure, I'm Bitcoiner first and then politician, but from a political viewpoint, you have to do what's best for all your constituents in the country, not just the Bitcoiners. So if you want to debase the currency and cause very much inflation, maybe even hyperinflation when you put on the printer to buy Bitcoin, I think it will create also, because it's so bad for the people, it will create sentiment against Bitcoin. Bitcoin could be seen as the cause of this. And the other argument I want to make is strategic reserves themselves. Of course, Bitcoin might be just for on the balance sheet, like gold is, but we can see other strategic reserves being used politically. We can see Joe Biden was selling the oil reserves just to get down the price because it was good for sentiment against him. Oh, the oil price is going too high. It's not good for my image. So I have to sell the reserves to fix my image. It's going to be politicized. You can see now with the disaster relief in the United States as well. I think it's very harsh, but it's also a strategic reserve, like for FEMA, disaster relief, and they're going to use it politically. So if they have Bitcoin on their balance sheet, maybe we can see that Donald Trump will put it on the balance sheet and he will use it ethically, just for reserves and for a good balance sheet. But we don't know who the next president will be, and he can just use it to sell it off in one big bunch, crash the Bitcoin market, which is also a problem, of course, and then he can just use it for, I will make the train fare for free. You will campaign on something, I will give you free stuff, and I'll sell the Bitcoin. We never know what will happen in the future.
All right. So that's one angle of criticism from Tom, and Shinobi, I suspect your angle is going to be a bit different. So let's hear it.
Well, I have a few couple points to touch on. And like, first of all, I think even in the most optimistic case of Bitcoin price performance in the long term, the value that Bitcoin could add as a reserve asset is insignificant to any country, anywhere, like especially something the size of the US. When you really take into consideration like what's the reasonable amount of coins they could accumulate, what will be the cost of that to them, and then even in the most optimistic price appreciation, like what does that really matter in terms of the backdrop of the overall deficit, the overall budget? Like the most like delusional Bitcoiner who is still bullish should just immediately go talk to a doctor if they think that those types of price levels are going to be seen anytime soon. And just to try to make this such a political football in the context of how irrelevant it is economically just seems like a complete waste of time to me. Like the risk-reward calculus of that is just broken, especially if you think about the context of like what other second-order effects is such an endorsement or adoption by government going to have in terms of how they have to approach this issue now going forward based on public sentiment. Like Bitcoin is a thing anyone can use for anything. Every fucked up thing that gets done with Bitcoin after a change like that now becomes something that that government has to indirectly answer for. Like they endorsed this. They said, yay, this thing. We are diverting like public money to accumulate it. And the incentives there just seem to me like that's going to cause the worst case scenario of how Bitcoin can be attacked by governments, like strangulating regulation, like surveillance baked into everything, insane requirement overheads for like what you have to oblige the government for if you interact with in this space, for them to justify like what they've done economically, allocating into Bitcoin, like endorsing it that way. And I just feel like the entire incentive alignment structure of an action like this is something that is delusional in my opinion, just hoping government will abdicate their attempts to influence and control things and just go, okay, we give up, guys. Or that's the incentive to just be as like animist as possible, to attack this and try to subvert it in every possible way just because of the realities of politics and them being held to account to public opinion and how what they've done for some strategic higher order reason, they still have to look at how normal people are going to react to and perceive that and what their reaction to that is going to be. And I see that as just setting up the worst case, like nightmare scenario of Bitcoin dealing with something adversarial. Like governments actually having a sustainable incentive to try to subvert it in like logical, tactical, long-term ways rather than just the stupid, futile attempts that we're used to. And I just think the whole thing is the worst idea possible.
All right. So a lot of good arguments made. I guess maybe we briefly recap. So Tom is sort of saying that If a government is buying Bitcoin, they're taxing too much, saying that he wants individuals to accumulate, and worries that the sort of slush fund, so to speak, could just be used for short-term expedient political gain by a greedy politician. And Shinobi makes a different argument, saying that the economic benefit, even in the most bullish scenario, isn't there. And in exchange for maybe nothing economically, you take on political risk because politicians who buy Bitcoin have to justify that purchase when things happen. And so maybe that sort of creates more attention on deleterious regulation. So a couple of interesting counter arguments. And Pierre, maybe you could go through them in turn.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm always for lower taxes. So I definitely think that's a huge drawback of building a strategic reserve. I think that money should just go back into our pockets. But then if we look at it over the long term, in my mind, having a strategic reserve could help lower taxes long term because now you're going to be able to draw on that reserve rather than tax in the future. So in my mind, it's just shifting the timing of the taxes. And then if we've got price appreciation, then it's going to lower taxes because the government will have resources that they wouldn't otherwise have. I think that in terms of the incentives that it creates, I think that the incentives are good. That it's going to shift both the mindset of the voter and of the politician towards a longer time horizon, whereas the fiat currency system very much emphasizes a short-term horizon. And so then, in terms of the political football aspect of this and getting more state attention on it, which they could do negatively, I don't see how that changes, just the logic of that. Because in my mind, them not having Bitcoin means that they're going to be more hostile towards Bitcoin. And then if they have Bitcoin, then they're going to defend it more. They might even get involved in mining or getting software developers to work on it. So the incentives, I think, the incentive change is positive. Now, not 100% in the sense that, yes, you'll still have politicians who make short-term decisions and who will, sell the bottom or panic sell or something like that. So that's where it's really interesting. And if we look at the bill that Senator Lamoen proposed, it was really about creating a long-term structure in the law that says that, okay, we're going to accumulate these Bitcoin and then we're not going to spend them for 20 years, right? And so then you put that in place to bind future politicians to the long-term horizon. And the other part of Bitcoin as a strategic reserve that is differentiated from any other reserve is the aspect of how it's secured. So with Bitcoin, you can do a multi-sig. With gold, you have to put it all into Fort Knox and surrounded by the U.S. military. And so I think the gold custody is very centralizing from an organizational perspective even, whereas with Bitcoin, you can decentralize the keys and have a multi-sig with lots of different locations, even different parts of the government, right? So it's not just the military securing Bitcoin, but you also have civilian control, and you could have 50 keys in each state. So I think that it unlocks a lot to have the cryptographic technology of Bitcoin. It could help reduce the risk of misuse of the Bitcoin reserve and really keep it for exigent circumstances or for big opportunities in the future.
All right. So what about Shinobi's point that the price appreciation may not be sort of sufficient to generate economic benefits? What's your sort of specific response to that?
Yeah, I'd have to run the numbers on a spreadsheet because Bitcoin's a $1 trillion market cap today at $60,000. The national debt in the U.S. is $35 trillion. And so, let's take the absurd scenario that somehow the U.S. government has all the Bitcoin, right? So they got $1 trillion of Bitcoin. And then Bitcoin would have to 35x, right, to be equal to the national debt. And that's assuming they get 100% of the Bitcoin. And so if they only get 10%, now it's got a 350x to pay off the national debt or something like that. So those are big numbers, and I don't want to get too bullish up here in the bull arena, but I don't see. I'd have to see like Shinobi's spreadsheet to see why that is such a unrealistic number, because it seems like, yeah, it's bullish, but it's Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin goes up, and it has gone up by orders of magnitude in the past, and I don't see why it would not go up orders of magnitude in the future under particular scenario.
Pierre,
we
are experiencing 10 years in the desert. Like, on a serious note, though, like, my entire thesis about Bitcoin from a market point of view has always been it will hit some inflection point and the price behavior will fundamentally change. Like these exponential like market cycles that we've seen progressively for the last decade plus, it's predicated on a market dynamic driven by a certain level of liquidity and volume, like a certain size. And we have grown to such a massive scope, like not only has like the assumption of exponential price appreciation like just stuck with everybody, but the lack of understanding that the exponential increase of liquidity required to continue those types of price appreciations is a factor. And so like I do not fundamentally believe that we are just going to see this as a cyclical thing that keeps repeating. Like, yes, obviously I hold Bitcoin. I think there is a bullish potential for it. That's why I still own it. But in my mind, those have always been, eventually it's going to get to a point requiring fundamental drivers. Like people aren't just allocating into Bitcoin because this is the price model or like how people are analyzing or projecting it's going to perform. It's, I literally have no utilitarian option other than to do this. That in my mind is the world essentially turning into Mad Max land. And as screwed up as things are, I don't think we're anywhere near that. And so like,
well, yeah. I agree with you from a transactional perspective that, using an on-chain wallet, that it would really only go fully mainstream in a Mad Max scenario where you need, maximum decentralization to protect yourself. And, but I think that from a store of value perspective, I don't think that you need a Mad Max scenario. In fact, I think that would be very negative for the value of Bitcoin if we were in that situation, because your purchasing power would decrease so much because there's just less being produced, right, in that chaotic scenario. So when I look at it, I think that your criticism is valid from a transactional perspective. From a store of value perspective, though, I think that we're at less than 1% adoption. Bitcoin has an extreme amount of utility from a store of value perspective, right? When we think about long-term savings, that is really its product market fit. And so that is what has been attracting so many people over the past 15 years. And the fundamentals there have only improved. And the adoption is very far from any kind of ceiling. There's still, it's a drop in the ocean when we compare it to the wider world of wealth. And so I think that, I don't know the future with a crystal ball, but I don't think that all of the returns on Bitcoin are in the past, and in the future it's just going to be muddling along, or 8% a year or something like that. I think that we're going to continue to see tremendous value appreciation.
Shinobi, sure.
Well, just really quick, like I feel like that ignores the strange loop of like how the store of value function works, which is ultimately rooted in speculation over like a means of exchange, that will be achieved in the future. And that is the whole predicate that the store of value function bootstrapping actually works. And so if we just try to isolate those things and not work on one or the other, it's just going to like not continue functioning the same way. Like that expectation that has historically driven like its fulfillment of that store of value function needs to like remain an expectation realistically. Otherwise, that behavior loop is not going to continue functioning the same way. And like where we're at right now, like the expectations, in my opinion, on a technical level, have far exceeded the practical ability to deliver on anything. And so I think we are witnessing those two things decouple. And that's going to not play out the way it has historically, in my opinion, until they're recoupled, until we actually develop the technical means to maintain those expectations that market participants are going to act on.
Tom, do you have thoughts here?
Yes, I think so. I think we all have pretty much valid arguments. This is kind of turning into a means of exchange versus asset discussion. And when we look at Austrian economics, like it's more of like a chicken or the egg story, you know. And when we follow Austrian economics, it says value comes from being used as a means of exchange, not just as an asset. But in my opinion, it's fully intertwined. Like when we look at how money came into existence, how it was formed, it wasn't like they started trading with berries and berries became the money. No, because berries they will rot away. You need some store of value in your means of exchange. So it's not either or the other, in my opinion. But I think we do need to look at both sides in what is best for Bitcoin adoption, because there's always the centralization risk. You know, I'm a staunch follower of Jeff Booten. He can say this much better than me, but if Bitcoin will be purely seen as an asset, and dollar and fiat money will always be more liquid than Bitcoin, in my opinion. So if we only see it as an asset, then we might go like retrace history. And with gold was first very much centralized. We had gold coins and everybody owned the gold. But when gold became the gold standard, it was centralized in the banks, in governments, in the central banks. If you go this route and Bitcoin becomes the backing of currencies, even if it's just strategic reserves and not truly the backing of a currency, in practice, it's almost similar. So I think it's a big centralization risk if we accept that Bitcoin will only be seen as an asset.
So, Pierre, what do you think? I mean, does a strategic reserve make some sort of proto-Bitcoin dollar more likely? And if so, does that create centralization risks in your mind?
I do think it makes it more likely. I mean, I think that de facto you would be indirectly backing the dollar with Bitcoin. Now, the huge difference with a gold standard is that the ratio would not be fixed. Right, so the Bitcoin would continue to freely float against the dollar in this with this kind of reserve. To the point though of, is that what we want? Right? Is that as a crypto anarchist cyberpunk movement? Do we really want everybody on layer 6 using Visa with dollars that are indirectly backed by Bitcoin? Through the Federal Reserve. And so, I think that's a totally valid perspective to say, hey, no, this is not the destination that we want to get to. I would argue, though, that it is a means to that destination. And that's probably the most controversial part. But when we look at what are the limits on Bitcoin adoption currently, I think the biggest limit is the anxiety that people have with regards to the volatility. and that they don't want, and so that now people are talking about, oh, well, stable coins, all this. It goes back to exactly that, of having a fiat currency that's indirectly backed by Bitcoin or treasuries and whatnot. So I think the centralization risk is already fully manifested with people using USD tethers on Tron, right? So it's like saying, well, is that a risk? It's not a risk in the sense that it's already happening. It's already being realized. And so I don't see it as like additive that, oh, if we add Bitcoin reserves into the mix, now we're increasing the risk. I don't think that's the case at all. I think that, if anything, we're helping distribute Bitcoin to the greatest audience possible, right? So this is the same analysis I have of MicroStrategy. MicroStrategy got hundreds of thousands of shareholders who hold shares of MicroStrategy onto Bitcoin. And when I was at Kraken and we added custodial Lightning, we added millions of users onto the Lightning network. Now, granted, they didn't each have their own channels, their own UTXOs on the base chain, but I just see it as part of the process of, hey, there's a funnel. At the end of that funnel is, hey, not your keys, not your Bitcoin, run your own node, have your BitAxe miner on your desktop, and be a sovereign citizen. I think that's the destination. And then there's lots of different paths that people have taken to get there, whether it's S-coining or using stable coins, or in the future, seeing a strategic Bitcoin reserve and thinking to yourself, well, if it's good enough for the government, maybe it's good enough for me. And I think that's the social proof element of it is really important as well, because when we think about accelerating Bitcoin adoption, do you have a higher leverage opportunity than the former U.S. president and hopefully the next U.S. president, Donald J. Trump, on stage, talking about the importance of never selling your Bitcoin? I think that's great marketing for Bitcoin adoption, regardless of whether a strategic reserve happens or not. The politics of it are very positive for Bitcoin, shifting the narrative away from energy consumption and criminal use towards debating the merits of using Bitcoin as a reserve and debating how high is the Bitcoin price going to go. I think that's a much better debate.
Shinobi, you look like you have something to say.
So I don't think it's going to shift the narrative in that way at all, as far as just away from negative things to positive things. I think that type of involvement of the governments endorsing and supporting Bitcoin to that degree is going to create like the horrible situation of we have to justify this. And now every tiny example of like something horrendous or horrible or fucked up that is done with Bitcoin, the government is now answerable for. And that's going to be the narrative that it creates, is we have to do something about this. And there will be a significant amount of people who will just go, yeah, do something about this. That's fucked up. And that becomes the incentive to just distort and attack Bitcoin in an actually tactically subversive way, rather than just impulsively or like, I'm going to do this dumb thing because one moment, but like long-term strategically, how do we actually undermine this? And it's just like, I don't see any scenario where this type of like government involvement with holding and accumulating Bitcoin doesn't go that way, unless you want to just go on a last minute bent to the left out of nowhere and start talking about DAOs on Bitcoin and how we can make DAOs work.
Yeah, I guess, when we look at what happened with Elizabeth Warren recently, a year ago now, with the October 7th attack, and she immediately came out and said that Hamas used Bitcoin to perform their terrorism or to finance it. And so I guess from my perspective, we're already there, right? They're already trying to weaponize and scaremonger events and distort. And so I don't see how a reserve changes things in a negative direction. I can only see how it would change things in a positive direction.
Well, just it makes you responsible directly. Like, whereas, like, currently you can just go, we'll do some, you know, this symbolic thing that accomplishes nothing. But where you actively endorse and participate in the thing, the incentive or socially assumed requirement to do something actually effective is so much greater than just, oh, this thing that we're not involved with and fix the bad thing. It's like, no, you're enabling the bad thing yourself directly.
I think we know empirically that their incentive is to cover it up when they're involved. And so we saw this in exactly the same scenario where Iran was money laundering billions of dollars through the Federal Reserve. And they didn't have money laundering controls on this. And rather than, try to take any kind of responsibility, they tried to cover it up and say, oh, well, we fixed it, now it's not a problem. But I think the incentive is not so much to attack Bitcoin as it would be to, hey, let's not take any responsibility and pretend nothing happened.
Sure. Well, we are closing up on time here, and so I think this has been an interesting conversation. I mean, you're kind of left to decide whether or not you think the government's incentive to crack down on Bitcoin meaningfully changes if it adopts it, and sort of by proxy, whether or not leaving it untouched is as much of an endorsement as purchasing it. So, fascinating conversation. One thing we never addressed, though, is how far out in left field is this debate, right? We sort of just jumped into it. And so I think with closing thoughts, it would be good for each of you to share just roughly what probability you assign to, let's say, the US government adopting a reserve in, let's call it the next decade. So maybe we start with you, Shinobi, and go down concluding thoughts and probability of SBR.
Well, honestly, I think that is just kind of like, how messed up does the world get? Like, the more messed up it gets in the next decade, the more possible that becomes. But even with how screwed up everything is now, like, under 5%, like, I do not realistically see Bitcoin anytime soon becoming that important of a political issue that it would actually get pushed through Congress. Like, we're just barely at the point where we have like a small group of politicians in both parties that are open to and engaging with this space. Like, to just think through like the support it would require from Congress and the president as a whole to like actually not have to deal with the judiciary if you're trying to step over lines or change them. Like, I don't see it as practical. Like, it's...
Yeah. Tom, what do you think? And maybe you can answer for the Netherlands.
Well, in my opinion, nobody knows the future, right? But well, Trump and Kennedy both were at Bitcoin Nashville. They were talking about adopting Bitcoin as strategic reserve. So now it's out in the open, they've talked about it. So in my opinion, this changes a lot. And I see that adopting Bitcoin as strategic reserves is in the next decade, in my opinion, is now above 50% that it will happen. But of course, that's what I'm saying. And it's still, in my opinion, always like the current financial system, which Bitcoin tries to undermine, maybe, that's a political opinion, of course, has a lot of lobby power and has a lot of strength still. So it's going to be like the end game. We'll see what happens next.
All right.
And I think all the arguments we had is just like, we know what the end will be. Bitcoin is unavoidable, and I think we all agree. It's just the way towards it is the discussion. And I fully hope, like yesterday, Jack Mullis was saying the same thing. United States are all set to put on the printer to start buying Bitcoin. If this happens, I don't think it's the best for the public in the United States, but when it happens, hopefully, it will be the last time they can ever use the printer.
All right, 30 seconds, Pierre.
Yeah, I'd give it 50-50, which is currently the odds of Kamala versus Trump getting elected. But, you know, I think that it depends on how good the world is. And the better things turn out, the more likely it is that we'll have a strategic reserve. The more freedom-loving politicians we have in office that understand Bitcoin and understand its value, the more likely it is.
All right. Give it up for these guys.
Welcome back, everybody. We are here at the Bitcoin Magazine news desk at Bitcoin Amsterdam. I am Frank Corva, the business and political correspondent at Bitcoin Magazine. To my left, I am joined by Tracy Hoyos Lopez, industry liaison for the Advocacy Project, and Amanda Fabiano to her left, co-founder of Second Gate Advisory. Amanda, we're nearing the end of day one here. We just heard this amazing talk talking about Bitcoin being used as a strategic reserve asset for government. Almost kind of insane to think about that we're already at this phase of governments talking about holding it as a strategic reserve asset, the U.S. government included. Your thoughts?
I think it would be fantastic if governments start to use Bitcoin as a strategic reserve. It's an incredible asset, right? Why we all have it, why we're all here. I do think that we've seen a lot of adoption and thought process of that might becoming a thing, especially with the Trump campaign. So hopefully we have, you know, a future president that is interested in having further discussions on that being a thing.
Let's stick with that. So Trump is now talking about Bitcoin. We know that the rest of the world is paying attention. I actually came from a panel where someone was talking about China paying attention to it more because Trump is talking about it. How much does this set game theory in motion, Bitcoin game theory in motion?
Well, first, you're welcome.
Yes. Please tell us a little bit about your role in that, too, if you don't mind.
I got David the introduction to President Trump. And then David, Amanda, and I worked together to get President Trump to the Bitcoin conference in Nashville. But before he even came to Nashville, it was how do we orange pill him, which we did.
Yes, you did.
And, you know, it was a very successful event that occurred because it kind of put the foot in the gas pedal with Bitcoin to the rest of the world.
Yep.
Now everybody's looking at a strategic reserve. Now everyone's looking at, hey, this Bitcoin thing, it may be real.
Yeah, and one of the things I think is most notable to say, when he does talk about crypto, he does make a point to differentiate between Bitcoin and crypto. Is that part of the work that you did as well?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So doing that sort of work, does it really mean sitting down with him taking a genuine interest in this sort of thing? Do you feel like him? And I know we had his son on the live desk with us in Nashville, and when we're talking with him, there's genuine talking points. This is money that's censorship resistant. This is money that dictators can't confiscate, right? So is that process, has it been eye-opening for him to genuinely say, like, I know that this is a wedge issue or something that people care about, but is he actually sort of learning in the process?
I think that, well, one is he's the money man.
That's right.
He understands
right.
money really well. So explaining Bitcoin to him wasn't like explaining Bitcoin to someone who doesn't understand finance or money or the history of money or the history of banking, right? He knows it.
Understood.
So once you're able to sit down, and here's the wonderful thing about President Trump is he's actually willing to listen to anybody talk. So he'll sit down with you and he'll listen to what you have to say. And if it's something good, he'll be like, okay, tell me more.
Yes.
I think that was the most eye-opening thing for me,
Yeah.
is like hearing him say, I want to hear about this and I want to learn about it, and sitting there and listening. I think, you know, there's Bitcoin, as we always talk about, should be an apolitical thing, but we have one side that's willing to listen to us and one side that's not. And so I think, you know, as businesses grow, you see this division happening, and, you know, people just want to run a business normally. They don't want to have to constantly be stressed out about things popping up that shouldn't be. They just
Or
want to be treated
discriminated
normally.
against.
Yes,
You
this is
know?
important. And I think we can very much, I think we were all in the room when he came to PubKey in New York City. and actually came there to buy some burgers with Bitcoin. The rest of the world, I don't think my phone stopped blowing up for a few days after that, asking if what happened there was real. So just some final thoughts on that. You have Donald Trump showing up to buy Bitcoin, genuinely listening to us as we asked him questions. What was that moment like?
I mean, he gave me a burger that he purchased with Bitcoin. I ate it, and it was delicious. Pubkey burgers are really good.
Shout out to Pubkey. Get those Pubkey burgers.
Pubkey.
And Thomas.
On that note, we are getting pumped up. Amanda, I wanted to hear what you have to say. We do have to kick it back to the main stage, though. We will be right back after this. We're heading back to the main stage. Again, we're here at the Bitcoin Magazine News Desk. We'll be right back.
Is your company ready for the next evolution in financial strategy? Bitcoin for Corporations is your partner in securing the future of your business. With exclusive membership benefits, our comprehensive masterclass, and a network of trusted service providers, we provide the insights and resources to help you incorporate Bitcoin into your financial strategy, ensuring stability and long-term value. Strengthen your business. Innovate with confidence. Bitcoin for Corporations, protecting your treasury and positioning you for the future.